I think if we take Chris's portfolio of 26, 27, 3,000 units, how many is it now?
2,600.
2,600. And we show that we can make them net zero for $4,000 a year. That should alarm everyone that's concerned about climate change.
The climate conversation has never been more divided. As disruptors in this space, we're hungry to find solutions to the challenges our environment faces. Welcome to the Climate Rebels podcast. My name is Joel Caesar. I'm joined by Owen Barrett and Chris Pomerleau. We are experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. We celebrate those who take action against the climate crisis and are striving to make the world a cleaner place. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome, everyone, to the Climate Rebels podcast. Today, as we're launching the podcast, we want to share a little bit about who we are, why we're the right people for this message, and we're going to talk about the groundbreaking real estate business that we founded together. That'll be a constant theme of the podcast and what we hope to achieve with this platform. So I'm going to start quickly with Rayven. This is our company. The three of us have co-founded with a few others. We're about to launch a Regulation A marketing campaign to raise investment funds from individuals around the world who are eager to take action against the climate crisis. Over the last 5 years, we've proven a business model that shows we can buy apartment buildings, decarbonize them upon acquisition, and increase their value for our investors. Rayven, our new company, is about scale. We're tired of incremental change. We have the business model. The climate crisis demands bigger, bolder solutions. So we're doing them. And then why us? So I'll start with myself, and then I'll have these two beautiful gentlemen explain why they're the amazing people that they are to lead the charge against the climate crisis. But I'm one of the world's foremost experts on net zero, both as an organizational commitment that companies and governments around the world are now stating their commitments to, and at the individual building scale. I currently lead Google's global net zero strategy for its 40 million square foot real estate portfolio. In the past, as a development executive in the city of Santa Monica, I built an $80 million civic office building that is widely recognized as one of the world's greenest buildings. It's net zero water, net zero energy. I've been named to Building Design and Construction Magazine's 40 Under 40 list. I was in Engineering News Record's 2018 Top 25 Newsmakers list. The United States Green Building Council gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award for implementing the world's first net zero energy ordinance in Santa Monica in 2017. So when it comes to net zero, I feel like I have a good perspective to share with the world. And for the past 5 years, as one of the founders of ZNE Capital, another business and company you're going to hear a lot about on this podcast, I've helped execute the business model we plan to scale through Rayven. I think that'll be a good segue to hand it off to Owen.
Some tough accolades to follow there, Joel. When I talk about why I'm one of the founders of Rayven, I think it's really important to dive into the history of the company and sort of the struggles that I've faced and we've faced over the last 5 to 10 years. So I started my professional career early on in finance, and I think that's important because I really got sort of a nuts and bolts understanding of how the world works, and that's via money. So I learned early on financial analysis, how do you drive decisions with dollars and cents. I took that and went to grad school for environmental science, met Joel, and that launched my career as a global energy manager for a Fortune 100 company. So I was in charge of overseeing the utility budget for a huge multi-billion-dollar company, and it was my job to save the company money by saving them energy. So in about 3 years, I deployed about $50 million of clean tech projects, everything from LED lights, fuel cells, storage, solar, HVAC optimization, really anything that met a 3-year discounted payback. That was our internal hurdle. I took that expertise and I started my first company, my first real company called Lumio. And Lumio was a niche energy management company for school districts in California. And in about 18 months, we started working with 40 school districts across the state, grew our revenue to about 8 figures. And after 3 years of working with schools, I had enough and sold that company to my partners. And I loved everything I was doing. Every dollar I saved went back to computers, teacher salaries, etc. But oftentimes I found that schools got in their own way when it came to making important decisions. And then that led to ZNE Capital. And ZNE Capital was sort of an aha moment for me in that I feel extremely strongly that we have all the technology in the world we need to solve climate change. We just can't figure out how to deploy it fast enough. And the reason we can't deploy it fast enough is because most building owners either don't have the time, don't have the resources, don't believe in climate change. There's a million different reasons why they're not deploying clean technology on their buildings, but that's the core problem. They're not deploying it. So with ZNE Capital, we became the building owners, bought property, and decarbonized it. And it's a great model. It would still work. The problem is that traditional investors in real estate usually don't support clean technology. They don't care about it. It's not one of the things that drives them. They just want to make money. So we started running into issues with scale trying to find investors that aligned with us with this double impact model of environmental returns and financial returns. And that's why we pivoted to Rayven. So Rayven is democratizing the ability to invest in net zero real estate. It's pivoting away from hoping institutional impact investors will let us scale and really putting the power to the people and giving everyone an opportunity to invest in these projects for a fairly low dollar amount.
Well, lots to unpack there. I have more questions about some of that past, but we have lots of time on the podcast to dig into your history further. Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of hard to follow you both as far as my experience in the energy realm. I have none. I have zero experience in net zero energy or anything climate changing at all. I really am just one of the legs of this table that have a very heavy real estate experience. And so, a little background about me. I was an attorney for 10 years. I'm no longer practicing. I still hold my license. I started investing in real estate 10 years ago as well. Quickly scaled from single family to multifamily. We currently have, just right around $228 million in 7 different states as far as assets are concerned. Majority multifamily. My company is Love and Wealth Capital. We had linked up with ZNE Capital when Owen had approached me, really just to say, look, I see that we have similar interests as far as passive income and wealth building and multifamily and real estate, but what are your thoughts on integrating some type of climate change aspect, some type of solar energy, water conservation, even social impact? And, believe it or not, when Owen looks back on it, I'm kind of curious what he thought about my response, because I'm sure he was probably expecting a no because he already had 40 no's before me. To me, there's no somewhat about it. I'm overly entrepreneurial by spirit, but I felt as though it was like the greatest alignment of the stars, if you will. It's something I've always cared about and certainly believed in. As I said when I started talking, I don't have a lot of experience in it. So I would have no way to understand how to apply this to what I'm very passionate about, which is real estate investing. So when Owen approached us and said, look, ZNE and Love and Wealth can team up and we can continue this wealth building and investment sector that is real estate and what you want to do. We can be as heavy as possible with net zero and the entire approach. That was really exciting for me. So now we've taken down 5 deals together already. The opening of Rayven and our new fund is going to allow us to take on hundreds of millions of more dollars of opportunities, which is phenomenal. And to what Owen said earlier, really, it's a stress we've been having. I joked with both you gentlemen before we got on today. Today I literally just got a phone call. They wrote me $1 million check. And that's great. They want to invest in some of our stuff. But the wall that Owen and I, and certainly Joel and Grant and a lot of the members of Rayven here that we've run into, is that it's hard to get some of these financial institutions to back the climate change approach. Or people will say they're impact investors and they want to put their money to good use, but then you bring up what you can do with it. They're never really jumping on. And so I think this Rayven opportunity and integrating real estate investing with the climate change approach is so incredibly exciting. And I think the scalability is huge now with they're opening this fund. So I'm really excited for all this.
Well, I think that's a good segue into what I want to talk about next, which is what we hope to get out of this podcast, what our goals are, and what was the genesis of it. And I think, Chris, the honest take on your experience and background with climate tech or clean energy is why we hope this is really going to be a special podcast. I think Owen and I come at this with expertise, as we just described. But one of the things we discussed when we decided to launch this show was we wanted an approachable conversation on the climate crisis movement. And it's this really cool way to talk to you and talk to many of our guests that will come on, not just about the immense challenges and some of the terrible news that comes about that the climate crisis is creating with natural disasters and weather anomalies. But we want it to be more about the upside, the optimism, the people taking action, the businesses that are evolving and shifting to adapt to the future that we need. And real estate, of course, is our wheelhouse, and we're going to lean into that. I think this is what's really special about your conversation. Not only are you an interesting thinker, someone I enjoy listening to on your own podcast and TikTok, but I think coming at it with this unbiased perspective. But what you said there about you cared, you wanted to care, you were launching this real estate business that's been incredibly successful, and now someone brought to you an opportunity to do both. And really that's what I think Owen and I have been, since we met 15 years ago in grad school, have been trying to find, because we know, as he said, the technologies to solve this crisis exist. We just need to deploy them. So I'll start with myself, and then we can pass this around about the podcast. Expanding on what I just described, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of content out there about climate. A lot of it's negative. A lot of it can be dry and wonky about carbon emissions accounting and what we need to do with various regulation, or, how you account for what's going to be available in the atmosphere to absorb the heat that's causing global warming. It's not approachable. It's esoteric. to the average listener. So we want to bring it down to the ground level and bring a new perspective. And I think something we've talked about as we've been inviting new guests on is we want it to be raw, we want it to be edgy, we want it to be real, we want it to be authentic. So I'm just excited about a new conversation around the climate crisis because I have not been able to find it in my searching of various other podcasts or content or social media followers. Tons and tons of information out there about climate, but I think there's a real opportunity for a new, fresh perspective on this, and especially to young people. As we're talking about Rayven, we'll talk a lot about that in this podcast, about what we're trying to do, but at its core is we're trying to bring this message to the masses to try to invest with us in net zero real estate. And that means we got to get this message to scale. And you start thinking, okay, who are the influencers? Who are the voices of sustainability and climate change, the heroes? If we could just get one of these people to help us relay the message, then we would get there. And I don't know about you all, but I find myself gravitating to a number of very legendary, historic environmental leaders, but there were older generations who aren't on social media and likely aren't able to mobilize massive amounts of especially young people who we hope this message really resonates with. So not saying we're going to become the new environmental heroes of the future, but I do think there's an opportunity for new voices.
Yeah, I would not sell us short. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the goal, is to be, to be viewed upon as such, but I think that there is a gap, and I think that it becomes polarizing, which is so weird to me, right? I don't know why it has to be so polarizing, whether it actually exists or not, but for those of us that believe in science, it's so great that you can combine that. And here I am going back to what I know the best. That's so great you can combine that with the wealth building opportunities of real estate, pre-existing real estate that's just sitting there. I mean, a lot of people, even in my shoes, and you two know a lot more about this than I do, but there are a few things that I'm telling you, the majority of people I know, they know a few things. They know they should probably recycle a little. If they can afford it, maybe buy some electrical vehicles. They don't really know what's all out there. And so to just think about pre-existing buildings that are already ready for solar is just quite the opportunity. And I think people don't really realize that stuff. Or the water conservation stuff we're doing that we've already done, going into full complexes and just replacing all of the toilets and all of the faucets with low flow. That's something I hadn't even thought about before. And it's so great that people can put their money towards really good things like that. So I don't think that we're necessarily inventing anything, that we're going to jump on anybody's Mount Rushmore of climate change. But I think that from the circles I run in and the people I listen to speak about this, they have no idea these additional ways they can make an impact. And that's what I think is so exciting about this.
My favorite thing that I hear from people all the time is like, how is nobody doing this? You talk to people, experts in the space, whether it's climate change or real estate. You explain the business model, and everyone's like, that makes so much sense. It's so obvious. How is there nobody doing this? And I mean, I could go on and on about why it's not happening. There's a lot of different reasons, but I think the beauty of the model is it's so simple and it's so effective. And to Chris's point, these are existing buildings. These are existing polluting buildings, and all we're doing is buying and decarbonizing them. And then, Joel, to your point, getting the message out that people can do something. Yeah, you should ride your bike, and you should recycle, and you should eat less meat, and if you can afford to, you should buy an EV. And there's things that everybody knows, but there's a big movement now of how to invest. People don't trust the stock market. They're looking at Robinhood. They're looking at real estate investing. They're looking at crowd-funded real estate platforms. Here's one of those that aligns with the environmentalism that is super strong and getting stronger. And so I think if we're successful in getting the message out, I think it's going to resonate with everybody. Not everybody. It's going to resonate with half the country.
I'd say more than half the country, and I think that's something to build upon, that the way Chris described it. I think most people in this country are good people who want to do what's best for the planet and their communities and their country. Does the information always get to them, what's available? Maybe not. I think, Owen, I know you're looking forward to on this podcast of talking about your recent experiences managing the Rayven TikTok account and arguing with climate deniers in our comment section. That is a loud, screaming voice on the internet, the climate denier. And even maybe on the other side of the folks saying, look, climate is such an existential crisis that we need to shut down the entire economy before it's fixed. So I think with all things, the reality's in the middle. And if we can be another tool in the solution box of the climate fighters out there, then great. That's what we hope to accomplish here.
Yeah, actually on the TikTok point, I spend most of my evenings looking up data to debunk these crazy ideas. But I was looking at what percentage of Americans believe in climate change, and then what percent of Americans are frustrated with the lack of action. And it's 2/3 are frustrated with the lack of action. So to your guys' point, it is more than half. It's 2/3 of America that we're trying to sort of appeal to and show them there are things beyond, all the items that we just mentioned to have more of an impact if you have the means to. So it's a big audience.
When we do the podcast, we're going to have guests, and we hope to find tremendous guests to bring on and bring us lots of different perspectives. But for today, it's just the three of us. Oh, and you mentioned the stock market and the lightning rod term that is affecting the stock market right now and financial markets in general. It's an acronym called ESG. Based on what we've described, or anyone who knows us, what we're trying to do with our business, you might call us an ESG type company or solution if we're maybe using that term incorrectly. But I would probably be interested to hear, Owen, your take. Are you pro ESG or not?
I'm definitely pro ESG. If I had to just answer that question, pro or not pro or con, I'm a pro of ESG. But I read an interesting article on LinkedIn the other day that the topic was sustainability is not ESG and ESG is not sustainability. And I think that is a really important topic because they tend to get intertwined. They tend to offend the same type of person. The person that doesn't believe in climate change is the same one that thinks their state pension fund should not be investing in ESG funds, stocks, etc. So they're becoming one and the same because it's the same arguments against both. But whether it was Illumio, ZNE, or Rayven, it's an environmental sustainability company. There are other things we can do outside of our main mission of decarbonization that have social impact, which would tie in the S of ESG, but I think of it as an E company.
Can you explain the ESG? I mean, because you two are so into it, right? So you get all the lingo, the acronyms, but I'm telling you, I get yelled at if I forget to recycle a milk carton or rinse out a little chocolate carton for one of my kids. If I drive too far or if it's too close, I should have walked. I mean, I know what to do, but the majority of people don't understand what ESG even stands for and or what the parameters are that surround that. Like why you would... or what if you know what this stands for, but you're like, why would you be anti? People don't even understand what that is about. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can do my best. It stands for, so the E is environmental, the S is social, the G is governance. I've spent a lot of time in E and S. I'm not super familiar with the G side of things. When I hear of anti-ESG, I think of Texas and Florida trying to create laws so that their state pension funds cannot invest into securities, ESG securities. And that's because the state lawmakers as a whole don't want to support climate change initiatives or sustainability. So they're trying to say, we will not allow our state to invest in ESG securities because we don't believe in climate change or we don't want to spend our money that way. We don't think it's the right thing to do. So just as climate change has got politicized, which makes absolutely no sense to me, that's like the one issue in America that should not be politicized. Do we all want a planet to live on? Is not Democratic, Republican. It shouldn't be, but it is. ESG is starting to go that way where it's heavily politicized and turning into a really divisive topic.
But maybe you can rewind even further, Owen. Why that acronym? It's fairly a new phenomenon. Like you said, sustainability has been in discussion, companies trying to be carbon neutral, net zero, all things we'll dive deeper into in the future here. But this acronym has now become the dominant term to describe people and associating investments with some kind of positive environmental or social outcome. I guess, did it come from Larry Fink and the BlackRock statement he made a couple of years ago? Is that where it started, the mainstream version of it?
Maybe. I don't know. It would be interesting to look up the origins of ESG. I know before ESG, there were B corporations. There's always been this idea that you could take a company and rather than have the only objective of it to be maximizing profits, you could have subsidiary impacts or alternative impacts besides just maximizing profits. That was sort of the idea with B corporations. I think ESG kind of spun out of that, but I would be curious who first coined ESG. I have no idea.
Well, I would imagine because of the way profits are driven, it's extremely difficult to get someone who makes year in, year out X amount of profit and expect them to make X minus Y just to give back to the planet. Whether that's wrong or right to say, by human nature, that can be tough. So I think some of the reason you see pushback, and I think that article that we posted recently from Forbes, I think it was, could tie into the tax incentives that are given through something if it qualifies or classifies somewhat in the ESG realm. Because you have a company make X amount of revenue, and then they can save on taxes by actually putting even more of their revenue towards this climate change, towards this impact type things. And I understand that's why most of this was pushed forward, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that article explained why it's a little iffy on what's going on anymore with that. So it hinted towards there's parameters that need to be followed if you were going to classify through ESG for certain revenue or certain type of business aspect. And the pushback there was that it became too controlling, and or can you really prove that these companies who say they're moving forward through ESG incentives are actually accomplishing the tasks that we all thought ESG would accomplish. And that's the best thing about this. That's why I don't even know about ESG, because I'd rather say that we're impact. We're just making a positive impact here. We're taking an asset that people live in already, that people invest in already. I mean, talk about BlackRock. Their portfolio in real estate's gone up in a very large amount over the last 3 years. They're just buying up left and right. People invest in real estate. It just so happens we figured out a way how that can also positively affect the world. And I think that's, like you said, Owen, why not? Like, why would you not do that?
I think that was a really good point Chris made. And this comes about his value here on the podcast. It's like Owen and I are sitting there struggling trying to define ESG. And I think you've described it well there. The nuance, the important part of it, what's trying to do now is be this official scorecard of companies claiming impact. So that was what I think that's what it set out to do. It was trying to say there needs to be a rule set, there needs to be a level of trust, and there's going to be these third parties that are going to apply that say you can be part of an ESG fund because you're doing XYZ on environmental, social, or governance issues within your company. And then if you are able to count yourself as ESG, again, I might be over my skis a little bit here on how the stock market and every investment works, but there's robo-advising, there's all these automatic investments happening, and if big players, big investors in the exchanges are allocating certain percentages of their portfolio they want dedicated to ESG, then it starts to really drive new companies to say, well, I need to be in those indexes so that I'm getting invested in more. And I think that's where this has become a lightning rod. Is all of us can say, look, everything I just described, that's good. We want companies to take the steps to become better stewards of environmental, social governance issues. We're not going to be Florida and Texas and be anti-ESG. The reason I ask Owen that question about is he pro or not is I think you start to see gamification by nefarious actors who shouldn't be in ESG funds but are able to game those systems to get in those indices, and then companies like us who are struggling to find capital to achieve what we will outline here as to be true impact struggle to get it because it's going to these potentially fake ESG endeavors.
Well, all right. So here's our first little game show segment of the day. According to Yahoo Finance, guess the industry of the number one rated ESG publicly traded stock in 2022.
Philip Morris.
Is it tech?
Electric generation. A company in Illinois, literally a fossil fuel burning company, is the number one ESG company.
But that's where I was going with my Philip Morris thing, is that these fossil fuel companies are thinking ahead.
No, 100%. But to Joel's point about like gamifying it and just figuring out the ins and outs and how to work the system, that doesn't make any sense. The reason that they're number one is because they've committed to half of their generation will come from clean energy by some future date, whatever, 2040.
Just like Philip Morris knows that half of its income and revenue will come from marijuana. That's why they're the biggest investor into marijuana. So that doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, that's great. Full circle a little bit back to maybe these are some guesses I'm having on the ESG movement. But you think about these hundreds of multi-million, billion-dollar companies that are looking into ESG, and this company you just named in Illinois, no doubt that's because there's some type of tax incentive or something tied to those type of classifications of why they'd want to do that.
Well, or they realize that they don't even have to do anything in order to get number one on the scorecard. They've just made a commitment for 2040, but they haven't changed anything about their business model. And now, all these pension funds, hedge funds, impact investors, air quotes, are all going to invest in this utility company because they score high on the ESG scorecard.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean for this to... I was trying to tee up ESG just to get to this game I'm trying to play, but since we're here, I think it's also about... There's 3 letters in the acronym, and some of us can argue one's better than the other. Of course, we're coming at this. We're going to be environmentally focused. I think that's clear here. Probably social is our number 2 in that bucket. Governance, as you describe, Owen, you didn't understand well. It's essentially big companies treating their employees correctly, treating their suppliers correctly. And that you can say, look, if I don't want to name names here, but let's just say fossil fuel company X, which we think is not doing great for the environment. But treats their employees incredibly well, has on-site daycare, gives great vacation, has amazing maternity leave. All things we think are good, but should that lump them into a category that people out there think if they're investing in an ESG fund, that means they're solving the climate crisis? And I think that's where we might struggle with the way this is currently set up.
How about even this idea that we're evaluating companies on their future promises? When did that become so popular? Whether it's net zero, ESG, it's like all of a sudden we're believing corporations that they're actually going to follow through on something that they said today about 2040, and therefore we're going to give them a high score today. That makes no sense. They should be evaluated on where they're at today. And then if they improve, great.
We need to get somebody on here actually that can speak.
I was just going to say, this is
intelligently of the ESG stuff.
Let's get a number of experts on here. And let's get people from Florida and Texas who are anti.
I would love, that would be a great conversation.
Who we're going to be as a podcast here. We're going to take these conversations head on. We're going to deal with the provocative issue in them, and we're going to try to unpack them.
I think, too, we should be honest with ourselves when we don't know what the fuck we're talking about and bring on the experts that do.
Well, luckily I'll be able to say that 9 out of every 10 times.
Well, the game I was going to play is, and maybe as we're talking about this, the way I'm setting this up isn't even right. I was going to say I'm going to name 3 ESG stories. Two of them are true. One of them's fake. So as I say this, though, I think the 3 examples I have today, they're probably not ESG specific. I'm actually using the term incorrectly the same way Owen described. Like I'm just lumping it with all sustainability. This is more about today. It's about carbon offsets. Are they real or fake? Also, what's fun about this is I use ChatGPT to come up with the fake version. So you guys let me read these. These are examples of experts or academics or companies pursuing climate offsetting activities. 2 of them are real and 1 of them is fake. Okay?
We have to guess the fake one.
Yeah. You ready? Let me go through each one. We can dive in after. Okay. Number 1 is startups hope to spray iron particles above the ocean to fight climate change. The intervention may break down methane, mimicking a phenomenon that could have amplified ice ages. Scientists say far more basic research still needs to be done. Okay, you got that one? We're going to spray iron particles into the atmosphere. Number 2, strategy to protect whales can limit greenhouse gases and global warming. So, no tech strategy to capture more carbon. Marine biologists have recently discovered that whales, especially great whales, play a significant role in capturing carbon. The carbon capture potential of whales is startling. When they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean. Each great whale sequesters 33 tons of carbon dioxide on average, taking that carbon out of the atmosphere for centuries. A tree, meanwhile, absorbs only up to 48 pounds of carbon dioxide. So that was 33 tons. Trees. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, the Air Cleanser 3000 is a revolutionary technology that captures carbon emissions from the atmosphere and converts them into clean, breathable air. Using advanced nanotechnology, the device is able to break down carbon molecules into their basic components and release oxygen back into the environment. The device is small and portable, making it easy for individuals to carry with them wherever they go. Simply turn it on and let it do its magic. The Air Cleanser 3000 also comes equipped with a handy app that allows users to track their carbon offsetting progress and earn rewards for their efforts. All right, so you got the Air Cleanser 3000, you got whales dying and pooping, and you got spraying iron particles above the ocean.
I can't tell if I'm more disappointed because I honestly don't know the answer, or if I'm more disappointed that somehow you have access to ChatGPT and I don't. I have never been able to get in.
Well, you know, I'm a big shot in the tech world, so you'll learn that over time.
I'll let Owen go first. I don't want to. Actually, let me go first because when I get it wrong, you won't feel bad because you should get this right.
Well, so we got to go count of 3 and hold up our 1 is
okay. That's fair.
Particles. 2 is the whale. 3
is one's iron particles. 2 is whale. 3 is the Air Cleanser 3000.
All right, so we're holding up our which one we think is false. Count of 3.
Yes. Okay, I'll count. 1, 2, 3.
Well, he waited for me. Like, this is rock, paper,
I can't
scissors.
see your hand. I can't see
rock,
your hand.
Paper, scissors, and he just waited until I went.
So Chris said 1. Chris says he thinks iron particles is fake, and Owen, you said it's the Air Cleanser 3000.
Yeah.
Okay, Owen is correct.
Dang.
The Air Cleanser 3000. So my prompt into ChatGPT was create a fake carbon offset concept. And that's what it came up with.
That's hilarious. So, now it makes sense. But wait a second. We're just spraying metal into the atmosphere?
This is why this is going to be a fun segment. There's hundreds of these. And, you know, in my day job, we'll talk about what I do at Google. But what's interesting is my LinkedIn account, I wish I could publish sometimes the messages I get from some of these crazy innovators and academics around the world who are coming up with solutions which they think can fight climate change. But, yeah, there's a lot of wild ideas out there. So Buckle up.
not to circle back to how awesome Rayven is, but can we just think through this whole carbon offset thing, just start to finish real quick? So we have Rayven that's decarbonizing on-site via on-site renewables. Then we have real estate company B that's just going to pay money to some whale nonprofit and pledge that by preserving X number of whales, they've had an equal energy benefit as us.
Equal climate benefit as us, yeah.
We got to get a carbon offset expert on the show. I just call bullshit. It should be mandatory that you offset on site as much as possible given space restrictions and then go to offsets.
So should Chris's $200 million of real estate that he owns, his company has owned over the years now, should they be decarbonizing their buildings or paying for whales to die?
I've got a great challenge for the three of us. Let's all find the cheapest way via offsets that we can bring Chris's portfolio to net zero.
How does that work? First off, yes, I'm game, but how does this work?
We're digressing. You were trying to make a point about why people should invest in our new company, and I'm getting back to Chris investing in crazy carbon offsets.
No, but I think it's all one and the same. I think if we take Chris's portfolio of 26, 27, 3,000 units, how many is it now?
2,600.
2,600. And we show that we can make them net zero for $4,000 a year. That should alarm everyone that's concerned about climate change.
It's a good soundbite.
It should.
So I think we all need to challenge ourselves to do a little bit of research, talk to the whale company. I've got a company that grows trees in Indonesia. I'll hit them up, and we'll see who can offset Chris's portfolio for the cheapest, and there should be a prize involved.
Well, we spent enough time here. I think this game is fun. I think we'll revisit it. I got lots more carbon offsets, and I'm sure ChatGPT does too. But it's a real conversation. I think, Owen, I know your stance on this, which is why I brought it up. You're anti-carbon offset because you think everyone should be doing more on site and more within their own business model. And of course, we agree with that, and we're going to talk a ton about that. But there's also cool stuff happening out there. This will be another cool group of guests that we can bring on, the ones who can back up and stand behind spraying iron into the atmosphere or preserving whales. I think, the three of us love the ocean, so none of us are going to shoot down the idea of saving more whales. But yeah, I think there's a conversation to be had about whether or not it's the right thing a real estate company should be doing to call itself net zero. Well, I think that's all for the core content of the conversation today. But another bit we're going to do is try to allow our listeners, our audience, to follow along with what we're doing at Rayven. It's an exciting business model in itself, what we're trying to do with the company, but even the making of the company, we hope, can be compelling because the three of us are in the middle of launching a Regulation A marketing company that's going to be an evergreen real estate fund to decarbonize existing multifamily buildings. So a lot goes into that on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And yeah, we think it might be interesting for people to follow along with us. So on that, who wants to start with what's pressing this week in the world of Rayven?
I think my biggest takeaway in the world of Rayven is do not hire more attorneys than are necessary. What I mean by that is we have an SEC attorney, and they have all done great work, so I'm not talking shit about anyone individually. It's just three attorneys trying to work together for a unified goal. Way too many quarterbacks. We've got an SEC attorney that's preparing our 1A, or prepared our 1A, which is the document we submit to the SEC to get qualification. We have a second attorney that drafted Rayven's operating agreement.
Wait,
and
do you want to maybe time out? Why are we doing it? Why is all the legal SEC work necessary? Maybe you can first define what Regulation A is and why we're going that route.
Yeah, and I think it would be really helpful to get Obama on this podcast to talk about his Jobs Act. So if anyone knows Obama out there, let's get him on here.
If you're listening, Mr. President, come on the Climate Rebels podcast.
So Regulation A is also known as a mini IPO. It came out of Obama's 2015 Jobs Act. It allows a private company to raise up to $75 million within a 12-month period. So the whole goal of it was to allow small private companies access to liquidity, similar to how big companies can access liquidity via an IPO. It is easier than an IPO, but it's not easy. There's a lot of accounting work that has to be done to making sure that your books are being done in accordance with GAAP, which is some accounting jargon. You need a 1A, it's also called an offering circular, prepared. It's like a 75-page legal document that has to be submitted to the SEC, reviewed, and then given qualification. And even before any of that happens, you need to incorporate a company that's going to issue the Regulation A offering, and that's where this operating agreement comes in. So it is easier than an IPO, but it's not easy and it's not cheap. It's still expensive to do. So I think my personal lesson learned is don't hire more attorneys than you need. We only needed 2. We hired 3, and it's made it infinitely harder.
And isn't it also important to clarify why we went this route? I mean, I think we alluded to it here and there a little bit today in this conversation, but it's about accessing investors who care and the way we're able to deliver the message to them as opposed to institutional, family office, accredited, right? That's why we're doing Regulation A.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this particular clip, you'll be the good cop, I'll be the bad cop. I'm going to go out on a limb and say every institutional impact investor is 100% full of shit. On record, I'm saying that after 3 years of research. There are no organizations out there that I talk to, and I probably talk to 40 plus, that call themselves impact investors, that are genuinely interested in impact. They're all interested in financial returns, and they want to market the impact of their investments, but they don't actually care about the impact.
But if I Google impact investment, I see a list of major companies and their efforts to fight the climate crisis, right?
Yeah, and all the Wall Street banks are on there, and they're all probably supporting projects that are done via offsets, and it's all.
And we've talked to them about our opportunity.
Yeah, and we've talked to probably a lot of them about our projects. And you have real estate people that don't understand clean tech. You have clean tech people that say they won't invest in real estate. You have, quote unquote impact investors saying that unless it delivers a 25% IRR, which is an annualized return, 25% annual returns, they're not going to invest in it. I would argue that's not impact. That's just regular investing. The goal of the Regulation A offering is to align ourselves with like-minded individuals. So people that invest in Rayven will earn a 10% return and support net zero real estate. They'll support decarbonizing existing buildings to the point of being net zero.
If you want to really geek out on it, it's an exemption that we file with the Security Exchange Commission. It's actually a protection for the investor. So if you're going to sell securities, which is what we're doing, they make you file something with the SEC. In order for us not to have to file it, we get an exemption. That exemption is called a Regulation A, but it's still a boatload of red tape and documents because the ultimate intent of it is to protect the investor so they understand fully not only what they're going through and what they will be going through, but that the person they're going through it with, or us, passes all the checks of the SEC. And so it's just a very safe way for someone to be able to put their money in a certain location.
Yeah, I mean, just to Chris's point, if we're telling investors they're going to earn 10% by investing in Rayven, the SEC wants to make sure that all the paperwork that we have internally and that these investors are signing leads to them getting the 10% return that we're telling them they're going to get. So it is definitely for their protection. It's not an easy process to go through.
And just like with the IRS, the SEC will perform random audits to make sure that our books are correct, that we're gathering the information from our investors that we're supposed to. So that's not very fun to talk about, but it certainly makes it much more official than just saying, I've got a microphone and I'm going to ask people for money to put iron into the air over the ocean. It's a legitimate business setup.
Well, here we are. We've put a lot of work into getting Rayven, the company, where it is now so that you all can be fighting these battles with the attorneys and the SEC to get us live, because our goal here is to have a place where, as Owen just described, individuals will be able to come and invest safely with us and help us develop this fund where we can decarbonize existing real estate. So much has been done to get us to this point. Lots of really cool stuff on building a new brand, on setting up social media strategy, aligning with various groups on how we scale this message to a very wide audience, because that's going to be the key to its success. And I think there's going to be a lot of fun content over the course of this podcast we'll get to share as we launch this campaign. But yeah, right now we're at a point where we have to wait on the attorneys and the SEC to let us go live.
Now, I know you want to get past that because it's not very fun to talk about, but I think there's something that should sincerely be highlighted, that without going through this process to make it actually a Regulation A, then we would only be able to take on money, or investors would have to be accredited. And there typically has to be a minimum that is much higher than many people feel like investing. And so this actually gives the opportunity to absolutely almost everybody to put in little compared to other investment opportunities and still have a positive impact. And so because we're going through the Regulation A, it actually opens it up to almost everybody as opposed to only accredited investors, which are really affluent people. So I think it's something that we shouldn't brush by. This is something that we've dedicated ourselves to give access to as many people as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So to Chris's point with the SEC exemptions, normally real estate private placements are done via Reg D. And you have a 506C and a 506B. 506B, you can take money from friends and family, non-accredited people, but you cannot market it. So you have to have pre-existing relationships with these people.
Can't make ads on social media. Can't
do anything. 506C, you can market, but it has to be accredited investors. And an accredited investor, Chris probably knows the definition better than I do, but it's I think $1 million net worth excluding your primary residence. Most people are not accredited investors.
Or making $200,000 a year if you're single for the last 2 years, or $300,000 if you're married.
I don't know median wages in America, but I don't think it's $200,000. Most people are not accredited.
I'm pretty sure it's in the 30s.
In the 30s.
I think the household's in the 50s.
Yeah. So it gives our investment opportunity to people that otherwise would not be able to invest in real estate because they're not accredited. It allows us to market to those people. So it's sort of a win-win for everybody. It allows a lower hurdle for investment. It allows us to market to hopefully reach like-minded people that want to invest. So it's a great exemption for the right types of opportunities. I'm really excited to get qualifications so we can finally get marketing.
Definitely.
Well, we know buildings are responsible for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We know out of the buildings in 2040, 2/3 of them exist today. So decarbonizing existing buildings, we would argue, and we will continue to argue, is as important of a fight as you can bring to the climate crisis. And through Regulation A, Rayven is trying to bring the masses into that fight to do it along with us. So we're super excited about that. All right. Well, that was fun. Let's wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining. You can find us on most of the social media platforms at Join Rayven. So that's Join, and Rayven is with a Y, Rayven. You can find this podcast and more great content at joinrayven.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to fight the climate crisis?